what I think, and the way I now approach directing, and I hope I now approach management, is that my job is to step back and to see what somebody needs to hear to unlock them. And I think that's true with pupils in a classroom as well. What is the thing that's standing in this person's way of becoming their even bigger and bolder self?
Welcome to the Bailiwick Express podcast. My name is Matt Fallaize. The Express team will be joined each week by a guest for a series of podcasts. Each will shine a light on topics from across the bailiwick. The format will change week to week. We'll have debates, reviews, hot seat interviews and special guests. So stick with us as we discuss some of the most important topics we in the bailiwick face. Daniele Harford Fox recently took over as principal of the Ladies' College. Born in England, her journey to Guernsey was via the United States, Kenya and Oxford University. She has a psychology degree and for a time worked as a theatre director. Danielle previously worked in a co-educational school, but she is a passionate advocate for single-sex secondary education. In the latest Bailiwick Express podcast, I spoke to Danielle about her background, her views on education and her ambitions for the Ladies' College. So thank you, Danielle, for doing this podcast with us. First of all, Ladies' College has recently had an inspection report, which I think we described at Express fairly, as a glowing report. First of all, can you just give us a summary of what the inspectors found?
Yes, thanks, Matt. I think it was a glowing report, I have to say, I have to be honest, and it's great because I can praise it without any kind of false humility because it had nothing to do with me, but it genuinely was. I think I've seen a lot of ISI inspection reports, and if I'm honest, a lot of schools are rated excellent, but when you actually read this report, I mean, if it was something that described the work that I'd done, I'd be incredibly proud. I think it's not just that the academics were fantastic, it's that they talked about the pupils being incredibly curious and having huge initiative and being problem solvers and putting kindness at the heart of what they did and being confident decision makers. And it's just everything I would want for the young women that we're taking care of. And
that is consistent with the kind of picture that you have built in your own mind of the school since you've arrived, is it?
I think it is. I think there was a moment when I came early, actually. I came for International Women's Day to give a talk. And there was just one moment that really struck me. So the students there's been some amazing music, there's been some amazing public speaking. But then one student got up to thank me. And what struck me was that she had no notes. She was totally assured. She leant on the lectern like it was her room. And she just said, well, I thought that was really interesting. I don't know what everyone else thought. And it was just this authentic assurance that spoke to me about a culture where individuality is really recognised and where the girls genuinely feel like their voices have value and them as individuals have value, and I thought that was fantastic.
Do you think that's quite, if not rare, at least unusual in education?
It is unusual from my experience. It's hard to make kind of sweeping generalisations, but it wasn't chance that I ended up leading a girls' school. I've come from really fantastic schools, but they are co-educational, and I have been open there that I am concerned about particularly how girls change when they're in a co-educational environment. I just see them kind of come in and they are, throwing themselves around and they're muddy and chaotic, and then very quickly they start to take up less space, they start to smile more and say less, they start to make sure that they're not making mistakes. Like I think in my previous educational experiences, that would have been pre-written, it would have been rehearsed to an inch of its life, they would have been grabbing onto those notes and speaking in a very nice voice, and so that sense of having to perform and having to constantly think about how other people see you, I think is true for many students, but I've really seen it being particularly true for girls. And I think what stands out at ladies is that you just don't see that self-evaluation. You don't see them concerned about how they appear to others. They aren't seeing themselves from outside. I was reading an article a couple of days ago that says that women body monitor every 30 seconds. That every 30 seconds, I'm sitting here thinking about whether my legs are crossed nicely and whether, I've got a double chin. I definitely have. And all of those things. And we kind of constantly reflect on ourselves. And that's because we see ourselves through the eyes of the world rather than seeing the world through our eyes. And I think what I love at ladies is that their hair is not brushed, it is messy, and that those girls are loud and they're laughing and they're thoughtful and they're curious, but they are individuals, sort of fearless individuals, and I love it.
I'm interested in exploring this because you have made this point a few times in various interviews, and as you said, you came to Ladies' College partly because it was an all-girls school. Yeah. But your experience has been in co-ed schools, yes. Professionally, primarily. So are you saying you can see a very real difference in most girls? I mean, the experience is bound to be different girl to girl, but in most girls you can see a real difference between those in even really strong co-ed schools and those in all-girls schools.
So I think there's two things I'd say. So one is anecdotal and one is more evidence-based. So anecdotally, I do think there are different types of girls' schools. So I think historically, there were some girls' schools that I call the cotton wool model of girls' schools, right? That, my mother went to a convent. That, those girls' schools where they were taught to be female. You know what I'm saying? They were taught those roles. They were taught to constrain themselves. And I think that would probably be worse than co-ed, if I'm honest. But I do think in the last 20 years that has not been the direction of travel of most kind of leading girls' schools. And I don't see it as the direction of travel here. And when you look at the evidence, there was a sort of study in 2018 that looked at 314 different metrics around girls in co-ed and single-sex environments, and almost all of them, they do better in single-sex, and that's from their academic performance in English, maths, science, it's their choices, it's their feeling of belonging, it's the level of bullying. There are so many indicators, and across the UK, consistently girls perform better in single-sex and co-educational environments. So that's just empirical data on that, really.
And so you've now had some period of time, but a fairly short period of time, in an all-girls school as principal of Ladies' College. And what are you sensing on the ground? This view that many girls benefit from an all-girls environment. How does that manifest daily at Ladies' College?
Do you mean in terms of what the pupils perceive, or
what the experience for the pupils and how that differs? Because you're now seeing that firsthand. Yes,
I think that you do see a difference. I mean, I make a joke about the messy hair, but it's an important one. When I've been in co-educational environments, as those girls start to approach puberty, their hair is straightened, their makeup is as much as they can get within the rules. Everything is about appearance, and you do see. You see that, and you also see a rise in kind of anxiety and perfectionism, which I do not see at ladies. I mean, I've only been there a few weeks, but you can measure the hair. The hair indicator is very obvious. But they just are a bit louder and more vibrant than I've seen. And I've worked with amazing girls. I don't want to demean the individuals, but I actually had this conversation just before I left my last school. I was sitting at a debating dinner, and I was talking to a sixth form boy and girl. And I was saying, they were asking me why I was going to a single-sex school, and I explained that this is what I'd seen at that school, and they both agreed that is what they had seen too. So I think I do see the difference already.
The counter-argument, I suppose, would be that it creates a slightly artificial environment, so that the wider society, girls have to mix with boys. So how do you respond to that? I mean, do you think that is not an issue, or do you have to do things at all girls schools which try to overcome that weakness? I mean,
I think if they led their lives entirely cloistered, then I think that would create some challenges, but that is not the experience of the pupils at my school. That they're doing loads of activities outside of school. They spend all of their time in a co-educational environment. Their homes are co-ed, their friends are co-ed, their co-curricular is co-ed. So really what's happening is we're just sectioning off some of their day that isn't that. And that just gives them space away from that gender role. And so I think essentially I think that they're getting the best of both worlds. And I think there is an argument that people make of, the world is co-ed and how will they adapt? But again, the evidence sort of supports that girls that go to single-sex schools come out with stronger mental resilience, they're more self-confident, they have higher self-esteem, and that keeps going post-university. So having that bit of space when you are developing just allows you to figure out who you are before the world tells you who you should be. And I think that gives them that assurance and groundedness that they take out into the rest of the world.
Of course, at sixth form, because of your partnership with Elizabeth College, you are essentially co-ed.
Yes.
Do you think that the advantages of single-sex schools for girls have largely gone by the time the girls are in sixth form? Or if you had the size and scale, would you rather maintain the all-girls environment into the sixth form?
I mean, I think there are costs and benefits of both. I think that actually at the moment it's a really perfect balance. The girls don't think of themselves as being in a co-ed sixth form. That is not how they frame it in their minds. I had my meeting with my new head girls team, and I asked them what they would want to share with the students. And one of them spoke passionately about the importance of girls' education. So whilst they are being taught in classes with boys, their social space is still theirs. Do you know what I'm saying? They have their whole common room, their friendship groups, their school. And so I think at the moment they feel that they still would see themselves as being in a single-sex environment, but having the benefit of mixing it with boys at sixth form, which they do outside of school anyway, but they get to do even more.
And you need to do that for the kind of breadth and richness of the curriculum in any event, don't you?
Yeah, and I think it's been a long-standing partnership, and there's benefits of... there are always benefits of working with others, and just having different frames to view things, because, we all get set in our ways, we all see things in a particular way, and so it is interesting working. Already I've seen it, that we both learn from having other cultures view what we're doing, and working collaboratively. And so I think that does bring a really interesting dynamic to Guernsey, I think, that shared partnership.
So you've come into a school which has had a really outstanding inspection report, which in one sense must be quite difficult, because you're not able to point to weaknesses which have been identified by inspectors and bring your staff along with you on any kind of journey of change. Genuinely, does that cause some challenges for you coming into a school which is in such a strong position according to the inspector's report?
You asked this to me before, Matt, when I first met you, and I said that's an astute question, because it is an astute question. I think I genuinely don't feel that way. I feel lucky to be walking into a culture that's thriving. I think there are enough challenges in education. I don't feel like I have to put my stamp on a school. I think the world is changing so fast for young people that coming into a school that is thriving with a great academic culture is just an amazing jumping off point to face some of the challenges that I see coming down the tracks, that are nothing to do with ladies or Guernsey, but to do with the fourth industrial revolution and the challenges our young people are facing. So no, I delight in it really, and learn from it. Like, it is, it makes my heart sing to see girls being that bold and joyful, and that just energises me, I think, and inspires me as we move forward.
What do you think, though, that Ladies' College could do better? Because no school, no organisation is perfect.
Sure.
It was difficult to find anything, actually, in the inspector's report which you could identify as an area for improvement in so many terms. But there must have been things you have seen which you would like to develop more at Ladies' College. Yeah,
I think we're having... we've already started the conversation. One of the things I said to the staff when I joined is that, when you get a new principal, I think a lot of it, a bit like Doctor Who. So you have to keep your kind of values intact, but you kind of reincarnate for the challenges of that time. And I think we are moving into a different time. I think that the work that my predecessor did on well-being was exactly in that moment and absolutely had to happen. And it's really great. And I'm really, you can't take pride in someone else's work, but I am impressed by the work that's been done. But there are new challenges ahead. And so we've talked a lot about where do we want to be, and I think that we want to be innovative and we want to be dynamic and we want to be really equipping our young women to be able to not only navigate but thrive in the 21st century. And I think, that's already led to some difficult decisions. So, for example, and this was a really hard decision. The day I joined, an incredible long-serving member of staff who'd been at the school, college for 32 years and was genuinely an institution and has done extraordinary work, tendered her resignation. And she led our Latin department. And that was a really difficult moment because it was very soon to me, my new tenure, very soon, hours. But we really needed to have a conversation of what are we going to do? This is quite a lot of curriculum time. What do we need to do and how do we need to use that resource to equip our young people? And we did think about Latin, and there were lots of reasons that went into it, but in the end we decided that actually we're going to use that time for skills that we think are fourth industrial revolution. So we're putting more computing onto the timetable, we're putting more independent work, more cross-domain thinking work, and that is a hard decision, but you you can't just add. You sometimes do have to make strategic decisions to equip young people with what they need. And so that was an example, I think, of the direction of travel. And I think there will be more decisions as we move forward, just to make sure that we are orientating ourselves right.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about Ladies' College in a moment, but I also want to understand more about you and your background. So, Danielle, where were you born? And can you tell us about the early part of your life?
Yes, I mean, I always ask, I find the question of where are you from really hard. My sister studies cultural psychology and she says that this has all messed us up. But essentially, I was born near London and I spent the first 10 years of my life living near Watford, basically. And then when I was about 10, my parents moved to Texas. So I sort of jumped from, I'd just done the first year, I did my first year of secondary school at a convent in St Albans, which was quite an experience. And then I moved from there to a junior high in America, and that is exactly like you see on TV. I just like to say, it's exactly that experience. And I was the weird, nerdy English girl. So I did a year of junior high, and then I did a year of high school. I skipped forward a year in America because I tested out because I wanted to avoid PE. Had to admit that to the PE teacher here. But I did a year of each of those, and in that experience, I realised that this probably says a lot about me as a teenager. I didn't like the American education system. I felt like there wasn't much room for critical thinking and challenge. It was very much you had 6-week tests, you learnt the stuff. If you learnt what the teacher told you, you got 100%, and then you did the next 6 weeks test. And I hated that. And so I applied to this boarding school in the UK that I had a family connection to, which is why it came up. And I was able to get 100% bursary because my parents didn't have much money. And so I went back to this girls' boarding school on a scholarship and bursary. And I did my GCSEs and A-levels there. So I've moved around a lot. And my family still live in Texas, so I still have the owl. I have that whole thing going. I do.
I thought I recognised something. So you critiqued your way out of a secondary system in the United States. Not all teenagers are doing that. And so how many years then did you do back at boarding school?
So I did 4 years, so 2 years GCSE and 2 years A-level. And again, that was a school that absolutely changed my life because before that, when I was in America, I was in below average classes. So I was extremely lazy as a child. I genuinely was very lazy. So I was a very lazy child. I was pretty lazy all the way through, really. There was a moment of change, which I can tell you about. But and when I got to that school, because it was a small school, and I just felt seen, they just really pushed and challenged me in ways that, and I was very difficult. I look back and think, I don't know if I'd have tolerated my behaviour. As a teacher now, I'm not sure I'd have tolerated how I behaved, but I was sort of figuring out myself, and I was a natural disruptor and challenger, I suppose. And they really had a massive impact on me. And so, I was the first person in my family to go to university, and I went to Oxford. And that was a real kind of moment, and I had never even considered that before I'd been in that environment. It was a really powerful experience for me.
And you read psychology, I think, at Oxford?
I did read it. I read it badly, to be honest. When we talk about
why did you choose psychology?
So interestingly, I originally was doing engineering. This is I think, I like questions. I like trying to answer unanswered questions. And so I'd originally been doing engineering, and then the summer between my lower six and upper six, I'd done an engineering course, and actually was like, no, I don't like this. So then I thought, well, I want physics. Engineering answers the questions, I want to ask the questions. So then I did physics and philosophy. I was going to do physics and philosophy. And then I was like, well, actually, and I did apply for some physics and philosophy courses, but I ended up then applying for a philosophy and psychology course at Oxford. And when I got to, which is what I got in for actually, and then in the first 6 weeks, I think I'd imagined that philosophy was mostly me just sitting around and saying what I thought. Transpires it's really hard. And I remember that first few pieces of work on Descartes, and I was just like, my brain cannot do this. This is not how I'm made. And so I ended up just by chance on psychology, and I loved it. It was the perfect subject for me because I think that psychology is this extraordinarily young science, which means that you can get to the edges of knowledge really fast. And so then you're asking questions that genuinely haven't been answered, and I think that's exciting.
Did you consider a career in psychology?
I did. I spent my summer working for a man called Kim Plunkett, actually, between my final 2 years, who was one of the original people that was modelling AI and computer learning. And in terms of children, he was modelling how children learn, and he was at the beginning of saying, this is actually how the brain learns. It isn't learning the way we think about it. It's learning through these kind of neural nets. So I did think about it, and I actually was particularly interested in the work around autism in that area. But then at the same time, I'd formed a theatre company, and I was doing a lot of theatre, and I decided that that's what I wanted to do. So
perhaps psychology, in a way, in the end, led you into education. But tell us about this detour into theatre direction.
Yes.
First of all.
So I have always loved theatre. It's always probably been a really strong passion, and I love directing, and I still love directing. I think when I look at how I lead now, some of my most powerful lessons of how you lead and manage people, I think I learned as a theatre director. When I finished university, I'd got a piece of advice from a posh theatre director on what to do, and he said just work with as many theatre directors as you can and see how they work. And so I did that for about a year. I worked with about 20 different directors as an assistant director. Maybe not 20, but a lot. I worked with a lot. And it was so interesting to watch how terrible we are at communicating. Like, we are so bad at communicating. And so it was just really interesting to watch that. I could see this vision in the director's head, and then that frustration at not being able to communicate that. And so I started doing that, and I formed a theatre company. I started directing productions, and I love it. And what I love about it is, when I originally started directing, I would come to the table with my whole concept of what I wanted that production to be. And I remember saying this to someone, I now look back with shame, and saying that, basically actors are paints and you just paint with them, which is just incredibly dehumanising. And then somewhere in there, I realised that if you approach directing that way, and I believe if you approach management that way, then the best you're ever going to get is for everyone to be as good as you. And what I think, and the way I now approach directing, and I hope I now approach management, is that my job is to step back and to see what somebody needs to hear to unlock them. And I think that's true with pupils in a classroom as well. What is the thing that's standing in this person's way of becoming that even bigger and bolder self? And I learned that lesson in theatre. It was like really watching this actor. What do they need to hear right now that will help them to unleash that next thing? And when you're able to do that, then the whole production, or the school, or the class, or the child will become bigger and bolder than you even imagined.
How long were you in theatre, and then how did that lead you into education?
So about 4 or 5 years in the end. So I did a year. I need to follow. So I went straight from Oxford to America. So I worked in some theatres in America for about a year and a half, and then I came back to London and I worked there for about a year and a half, 2 years. And then I got this project in Kenya. It was a year-long theatre project, which took me out to Kenya. It was a really amazing piece of theatre. From the beginning we got to design it, and I hired Kenyan writers and all of those things to run this year-long project. And then at the end of that, I was asked if I wanted to run a theatre in Kenya. And by then I'd slightly fallen in love with Kenya, actually. There were amazing things about it. And so I stayed and ran a theatre there for a couple of years. And whilst I was doing that, to make money, because there is no money in theatre in any country, but certainly not in Kenya, I started working with the international schools, sort of training their teachers, creating drama programmes for them. And there came at the end of that 2 years, I really hadn't had a day off. I maybe had one Sunday off a year, and I was absolutely burnt out. And I remember sitting on the grass outside this theatre, close to rocking, it was one of those moments. And I just thought, don't think I can do this anymore. And it was like a sort of snap, and that passion for theatre just stopped. And so I was like, well, what do I want to do? And my whole family are teachers, and I think I'd always known that that's where I would go.
You're the daughter and granddaughter.
I am.
Teachers,
so my mother was a primary school teacher. Both my aunts are primary school heads, and my grandmother was the head of a girls' school. So it has got a kind of legacy. It is slightly legacy from. So yeah, I approached one of the top international school and said, "You haven't got a psychology department. I've got a psychology degree," and they were up for it. And so that's how I made that move.
Are you teaching psychology or theatre at Ladies' College?
I'm not at the moment. The actual thing that I want to do is I'm going to do some debating. So the recent passion, actually, for probably the last 8 to 10 years, the thing I've become very passionate about is debating, British parliamentary debating. I think it's, as a teacher, I found it to be one of the most powerful mechanisms, because the way that this type of debating works, they don't get the motion until 15 minutes before they debate, and I can't help them in that 15 minutes. And so all you can do is teach children to think, and then they have to learn that they can think for themselves. And so for me, that has been one of the great things I've spent the last 10 years doing, and it's something I'd like to do at Ladies. So in September, I'll be starting doing that.
So Watford to Texas, to St Albans and Oxford and Kenya.
Yeah.
And so what attracted you to Guernsey and to Ladies' College?
Yeah, so it was. So I think about 2 years ago, I started to think that I wanted to pursue a headship, and so when Ladies came up, I applied. But of course, it was in lockdown, really. So the first 2 rounds I did online, and we'd all expected for me to come out to Guernsey for the final round, and then the sort of the real lockdown happened, and I couldn't. And so poor governors. So both they and I had to sort of take a jump into the dark. And in improv, I do a lot. The last few years, I've done quite a lot of comedy improv when I was in Birmingham. And there's a really great saying in improv, which is, when you say no to something, you're rewarded with safety. And when you say yes, you're rewarded with adventure. And I just felt, both my husband and I felt we had adventure in us. And so we said yes. And I do remember the moment, that summer we flew over, and there was a moment, I have to be honest, where we both saw the size of Guernsey as we were flying in. I thought, oh my goodness, it's quite small. But when you land, it's not. And I think we haven't had any doubts about that. I think we've loved it. It's felt very comfortable and authentic and beautiful. So that's actually been a great adventure.
It's been, and I suppose still is, a period of change for Ladies' College in terms of its role in education in Guernsey generally. At one time, it had special placeholders, which guaranteed it 23 pupils every year. Elizabeth College is now taking girls, so the whole kind of landscape has changed for Ladies' College. In terms of your relationship with the other grant-aided colleges, Elizabeth and Blanchland, do you now think that you are much more competing for pupils than ever would have been the case previously?
I mean, I don't know. I think that I think each of those 3 colleges offers something quite unique, and I think that is valuable to Guernsey. I think, and it's valuable to parents to have that choice. Obviously, I think girls should go to Ladies' College. Obviously, I think that. But I do recognise that people have different values and different thoughts about those things. So I don't know if competition is the right word. I've been talking to Jenny today. I actually find it, again, it's that collaboration thing. I think we find there's a lot that's quite helpful in our partnership, and we do work together as the 3 colleges, particularly as the 3 principals, because there are shared challenges and shared experiences as principals that I think we find that collegiate nature quite helpful. But yeah, I recognise the landscape is changing, but I think that almost that's kind of clarified what makes each college unique and valuable, and I think that's probably only to the good.
What do you think it is that is distinctive about Ladies' College? The most obvious thing that everybody will think of, we've spoken about, it's a girls-only school, but in terms of what it's offering its pupils, what makes it really distinctive, do you think?
I mean, distinctive is hard because it's making a comparison to other schools, and I'm not even visited Elizabeth College of Blanchland, so I'm definitely not going to say that we're unique in what we do, but I would say that what I think, obviously the girls thing, but I think it is more than that. It is, even if the girls things put aside, this is a really great school, and I think what makes it great is I think you have incredible relationships between staff and students. The staff talk about that, the students talk about that. I had a member of staff just leave, actually, who'd been doing a maternity cover, and he had been, I won't name the schools, but he'd been very senior in a lot of very big schools, and he said this was the most I don't know what the word he used, but the best staff room he'd ever worked in. It is a really fantastic group of teachers, and a really fantastic community of people, with the parents and the pupils. So I think that's the thing. I do think that we are quite innovative and forward thinking. I do think that we are thinking about our tech, we're thinking about those computer skills. The DT, I bet there's more children that do DT at Ladies than like a number of co-educational schools combined. Girls' schools, when you put girls together, like those girls are taking those subjects, they are thinking about the future, so I think there's loads of things that make it great. I think our job will be to clarify that in the next year or two as we move forward. But I think that it's a thriving school. It's a school where every pupil is really well developed. There are amazing relationships between teachers and pupils, and I think it is forward-thinking, it is innovative, it is a really dynamic place.
Do you think one of your tasks is to do more to communicate that and promote the distinctiveness and the offer at Ladies' College?
I absolutely do. I think, one of the things, I don't want to bring gender into it, but I think we are encouraged as women to sort of smile sweetly and just do our job as well as we possibly can. And And maybe that's not my skill, is to smile sweetly and stay quiet. So I think, yes, I think my job is to make the voice louder. And I think, you asked the question earlier about, how difficult is it to come into a great school? I suppose one of the reasons it doesn't feel difficult is I can see where I can add value. And part of where I can add value is just literally sharing what a gem of a school this is.
In terms of sustainability, do you have any concerns? Because you are now unique in being a single-sex school.
Yeah.
And this is, in population terms, a relatively small island. So I don't have a handle on how many girls you need to be viable, but do you have any concerns at all about sustainability and viability, and whether in the end a business decision may be forced to have to give up the girls-only character of the school?
I definitely think that there is a place for girls' education. I'm not worried about that as a business decision. I think that, there will be parents who choose co-ed because they have strong feelings about it, but the evidence is on my side. and it's a brilliant school. And I think that, and I think that for Guernsey, almost that makes it something that Guernsey should protect and maintain. And I think there are parents that want it. I hear from them all the time. Parents tell me that is a big factor for them. And I know the governor's are really committed to it too. It's something that we see as really central to who we are and essential to our role in Guernsey. That this is the thing that we offer to the young women of Guernsey. And I want us to keep offering it. And I think that there are parents that want that too.
Finally, Danielle, I want to touch on curriculum because you played a very key role in making curriculum changes at your last school. There's this debate nationally or internationally about skills and knowledge, and you referred to that in some of the literature I read from your last school. Can you share your views with us about that?
Yes, you're going to find my views on this about as strong as my views on girls' education. So, so I think, we are entering the fourth industrial revolution. When I started talking about this 5 years ago, that term was maybe not easily accepted, but now it's like on the front page of the the World Economic Forum. It's recognised by the UK government. This is happening, and yet the system of education that we provide is the same that we provided in the Victorian era. We separate knowledge into silos. We call subjects. Teachers are the holders of that knowledge, and they pass that knowledge on to children. And then, and this is really quite weird if you actually think about it, we rank our children on their ability to reproduce that knowledge in examination conditions, and that ranking then determines what they do in life. It's a weird system, anyway. But when you look at it in the context of the kinds of demands we're about to meet, it doesn't feel adequate. And when you look at the kind of research, and I spent, as you said, in my last school, I did quite a lot of work, and I spent about 6 months properly researching what the potential future looked like. And you see two major areas, three, but I won't talk about. So there's the cultural piece about how, and I think we talk a lot about that, about how social media is, first of all, changing the way that young people interact, and I could speak endlessly of that, but also how I think it's increasingly difficult to separate truth from noise, which is something you must know as a journalist, that's a massive democratic pressure, because I would say that societies are constructed on a shared agreement of how we determine truth, and so when you fray that, you fray everything. So there's that piece. There's a significant rise in unemployment that all of these organisations anticipate, from 15 to 45%. You get different, places like Harvard and Oxford, Deloitte, these people are speculating. And then you have the industries that are going to be hit, and those are kind of areas that can be automated. So I think about Uber and how that, in a year, that algorithm, destroys 30,000 global taxi companies, and all of that money is centralised into California. So you have that, but particularly for schools like mine, you have knowledge-based industries as well. So for a number of generations, parents have felt that if they can invest, and children have felt if they can learn knowledge, then they'll be able to get a secure career as a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant or an actuary or scientist. But the reality is that the way that this technology works is it will very quickly be able to aggregate like tens of thousands of pieces of information and predict outcomes in a way that the human brain just can't. And so that is really going to hit on the industries that people like mine are interested in. So you have that future, and at the same time you have an education system that just isn't thinking about that. There's just no serious conversation about it. And so yes, I do think there's a conversation about skills versus knowledge. I don't think that distinction actually isn't helpful, because in order to make the kinds of links you need working knowledge. Like, you have to have that knowledge base in order to be problem solving, to be critical thinking. You have to have that working memory and knowledge. But we really need to be honest about how humans are going to interact with that technology and where we see the skill needs. And then we need to work backwards very quickly, because the young people that have just entered my year 7 are going to graduate in 2030, 2031. And they need the skills now. I have to teach them now. And so we need to be at the front rather than the back. And that's really hard, because teachers often, and educators, we learned a particular way, and we liked that way. That's why we became teachers, and we've been teaching that way. And so it is really hard to get that change.
So this is big change, not necessarily radical if it's responding to a need in society, but it's big change nevertheless.
It is.
As the head teacher of a relatively small,
yes,
albeit successful school, how do you go about that? Yeah.
And I think, as you said, I did some work at my old school on this, and I think there is a point at which I'm quite a pragmatic. I'm both an idealist and a pragmatist in some ways. Like, I have big vision, but then I want to think about how it's practically going to apply. And I think what you have to think about, first of all, you can't have total radical change, because the hoops that our young people have to jump through are still there. They still need the GCSE and A-level results. They still need to go to the degree, because most organisations still use that as an indicator of who they're going to hire. So you have to keep running that system. The question then is, what's the best we can do in addition to that? And we have to think about that in the context of each school. What are these pupils wanting? What does this community need? Where are they seeing? What are the skills for this particular group that we're going to need? And how do we think about equipping them? Now, I'm not, Ladies College has already started this conversation. They've already invested in future ready skills. They are already committing to being a Microsoft Showcase school. They are already thinking ahead. But I think we recognise on the senior leadership team, when we started the conversation, that we're at the beginning. We have made the first steps, but we've just opened the door. And that is now that we have, unfortunately, change is going to continue apace, and we have a moral and strategic responsibility to keep doing that too.
Well, it's an exciting time to be in education, and we're very grateful for your time. So thank you very much, Daniele Harford Fox.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Bailiwick Express podcast. The title track was Shift My Weight by Luno. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and share. Remember, you can always hit bailiwickexpress.com to stay right up to date with what's happening in the Bailiwick. You can find us online, on social, on email and on internet radio. There'll be more from me, Matt Fallaize, and all the Bailiwick team next week.